Hi everyone, welcome to I's workshop for Macro Hackathons. Today we have Ryan, who's the CTO of NFTfi, who's going to be going over the smart contracts and the bounties that's for grabs. They have 2 bounties available for the hackathon that's worth 7,000 USDC in total. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. And Ryan, I'll let you take it away from here.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to describe the 2 bounties, and then it'll be good to get a little bit of feedback of where the interest lies in people here, but I will describe both of them and leave breadcrumbs for exploring both. Bounty number 1, to give you some context, NFTfi platform, it's a loan platform, and we have to permit the NFTs that are used in our loans. So you can't just make a loan on absolutely anything. It must be something that we've permitted. And we permit mostly art, collectibles, gaming, some gaming items, metaverse assets, and so on. But we don't permit financialized NFTs. So we don't permit financialized NFTs, for instance, swap LP tokens, our own promissory notes, which are NFTs that are minted when you make a loan and you're the lender, you will get an NFT that represents your rights as a lender. And if you pass that on, sell it, transfer it, the new owner will receive the funds and be able to foreclose the loan. So the owner of this promissory note is really the lender. But these assets are financialized NFTs. So to actually do loans on financialized NFTs puts it into a different kind of category. Suddenly it becomes security, or it may be treated as a security. And to do loans of financialized NFTs takes you into a new category legally. But with this hackathon, we want to just encourage exploring some experiments with these financialized NFTs. So you will see in the bounty document that I'll point to again, but it's on the Notion page. You will see more detail on there's like a fleshed out example of how would it look like that is actually doing loans on a Uniswap LP token or a promissory note or so on. But really, this bounty is about we want to see the best additional asset class, period. So financialized assets are one category that are very interesting. Maybe there's something else that you have in mind. Also welcome. We're open to interesting new asset classes. So that's this bounty. And it's really about thinking about how would you frame the 2 to tell the story of doing loans on, for instance, promissory notes. What would you filter on? The DApp interaction, and the interaction is the same as with collectibles, but the details, the devil is in the details, and that will differ. So really to design a compelling interface for financialized assets. Okay. Doing loans with financialized assets on NFTfi. Okay. Carrying straight along. This bounty is about, number 2, there's a suggested bounty for creating an options protocol on top of NFTfi. So to give you some context, NFTfi loans, typically what you with in our DApp is this fixed interest rate loan type. But it's just one of the loan types that plug into what we call an agreement coordinator, which is just something that facilitates the beginning of this loan, which is really in more general sense an agreement. It allows you to begin this agreement and resolve it. Resolving means you repay it or you liquidate it. Those are both, repaying and liquidating are both ways of resolving the loan. But this agreement coordinator is the building block that lets you build loans. We also have prorated interest loans and already written, but not on the platform yet, things like loans on NFT bundles and so on. But really, we want to put in a call option contract alongside these loan types, these agreement types that we have. So to write a put and call option that plugs into our agreement coordinator and can sit alongside our agreement types. As it stands, to give you more context on this, our loans are now being used already as put options. It can be. And I wanted to just describe that for you and give you a visual language for how to think about this, and then just frame the call and put options and exactly what that interchange of liquidity and asset looks like. So this is the regular loan. This is a plain old loan that we have now. So we have a borrower and lender. The borrower has the NFT. And here I've just called the interest payment F. That is the amount of, let's say, WETH or DAI. And the lender has the liquidity, the principal, let's call it S here. And that will also be WETH. If the loan is in WETH, then the interest is in WETH and the principal is in WETH. When we begin a loan, the borrower's NFT goes into escrow with our contract. The borrower holds the interest still. They're not paying that yet, but the lender pays the principal over to the borrower. So the asset now sits with NFTfi contract in escrow. The borrower has the principal. The lender has nothing but the promise of being repaid or possibly liquidating this thing. So if the NFT, if at repayment time, the borrower finds that the NFT price is less than the principal, they can choose to default on this loan. And this already happens. And in a sense, when they default, they just don't repay. The NFT is in escrow. The loan goes into default, which means the lender can foreclose. And that means in our contract's case, the NFT goes to the lender. So at the end of a default, the borrower sits with the principal. They never pay the interest, and the lender sits with the NFT. So this is a put option, except that the borrower didn't pay an option fee explicitly, but in their valuing of the loan, they might have included that in the principal when they negotiated that. If they repay the loan, so let's say the NFT price is still greater than the principal, then they transfer the principal to the lender. They transfer the fee to the lender, the interest, and they get the NFT back. So that's the plain vanilla loan. Any questions before I show you the put option? So put option now isn't borrower and lender, but buyer and seller. So it's a reframing of the roles, but it looks pretty much the same. So you've got a buyer on this side. This is the person with the NFT. And F is the fee that they want to pay. So they want to buy the right to sell the NFT at strike price S at expiry time of this arrangement. So this looks very much like what I just showed you for loans, except when you buy an option, you're actually transferring, you're buying the fee. The F here is the fee you're paying for the option. You're paying that up front to the seller. So you're saying, I'm buying this option to sell this NFT at S, price S. NFT goes into escrow. I pay the seller right away for the privilege of having this option. And in this case, the seller can give me the actual sell price already. Now, this is a bit weird because a normal option, I would just pay for the privilege of buying this thing at some point or selling it in this case. A real option, in the case of a real option, I might not even have the asset. I can still buy an option to sell something I don't have at a certain price. In this case, to guarantee the interaction, we can frame it like this. So the seller already gives, so the buyer is actually selling the option, getting the value up front. And then when, just like I showed you for the normal loan, when the price drops below the principal or the strike price, the buyer defaults. They just don't repay, and they lose the NFT. meaning they sold it because they kept the price, they paid the fee to the seller. At the end of the exercising that put option, the seller has the NFT and the price, the fee for that option. And the other case is NFT price is greater than the strike price. Buyer of the option doesn't sell. And they take their NFT back. They give back the principal to the seller. And at the end of this, seller has the fee for the option plus the principal back. Buyer has their NFT back. So that's a way that you could frame a put option more explicitly. So what was different between this and the previous page I showed you is that the fee here, in our regular loans, the fee isn't paid upfront. It's paid after the fact. It's paid as interest on loan, whereas for a more proper option, fee is paid upfront. And seller, if the buyer doesn't exercise the option, the seller still gets the fee. That's the difference. So that makes this is a move towards a more proper put option, framing it in the way of agreements. So call options are, people can't use our loans to simulate call options. They can use it to do put options, but not call options. So I just want to show you why that is and how that looks. Again, now on this side, the NFT holder is the seller in this case of the option. So there, the call option is in the right to buy at price S for fee F. So now the seller has the NFT, buyer has the premium, the fee that they're going to pay for the option, and the strike price. They have that on hand. So how this could work is when you buy the option, NFT goes, now the NFT moves to the buyer upfront, which is different now. NFT doesn't go into escrow, NFT goes straight to buyer. The buyer's buying price goes into escrow. So it's an anti-symmetric case of the put. And the buyer pays the fee to the seller. If the price is greater than the strike price, you'd want to buy at that price, in which case the buyer just keeps the NFT. And the strike price, that principal, goes from escrow to the seller. And similarly to the other cases, when the buyer chooses to not buy because the price is less than the strike price, they transfer the NFT back and they get their money back from escrow. So this is, of course, not exactly how you need to do this, but I wanted you to just see how these things sit alongside our agreements. So you have to arrange things in a way where, in the case of the call option, the buyer, put and call options, is the buyer who has the right to exercise or not, which makes all the difference. So if the buyer gave the principal, the strike price S, to the seller directly, they wouldn't later be able to exercise because the seller could just ignore. The seller is now earning the principal or the strike price. So you have to think of what should go in escrow, what can actually be moved up front, and when does the fee move, and so on. These examples and the way I framed it is quite capital inefficient, very capital inefficient, in the sense that when I buy, normally if I buy an option, I don't transfer the whole, if I want the right to buy this NFT, I don't have to put the whole buying price up front into escrow. I just pay the fee. And later when the option gets exercised, the money flows. Now, of course, in the case of smart contracts, there is no legal framework that can enforce the exercising of the option, which is why you have to think of what goes into escrow. How capital efficient can you make it? This is a low efficiency example, and I think one can probably do better than this. Any questions at this point?
So One was, can you explain more about how royalties and auction?
Yeah, so auctions are a way then auctions are a tool. So we don't have auctions in our platform at this point. That's the first point to make. But auctions come into play when you liquidate. So in our case, let's say you liquidated a loan, then one model would be to take the asset, put it up for auction, and then decide how to split the proceeds. Lender gets back principal if it's possible, maybe borrower gets excess, and so on. Auctions could play a part of this, could be a part of the answer to options in the way of you would when you exercise these options or decide not to exercise it, it depends on whether it's put or call. It could be a building block in this where you put the NFT up for auction. But having said that, I don't know exactly. It doesn't really make sense, for instance, in this case. If you're buying the right to buy an NFT, you're not going to put the NFT up into auction. You actually want to hold the NFT. So I'm not sure I quite understand the question there, but in terms of royalties, not sure what the context for your question is there. But maybe the NFT, if you mean the NFT has royalties attached to it, that's a layer of complexity that I don't think that's definitely going into bonus material for this bounty, because it would change the physics of call and put options if that NFT is actually revenue generating.
And a follow-up question from Aman was how price fluctuations work on NFTfi. And I think it's important to understand that it's a bullet loan and basically they don't have any effect, but like maybe you can.
Because it's peer-to-peer bullet loans, so the price is up front, you get the principal or not. You don't get partially paid. It's a full repayment or not. It's a full default or a full repayment. So price fluctuations really happen out of band of the agreement. And really how they come in is when it comes time to resolve the agreement, whether it's a loan that you're repaying, whether it's a put option that you're exercising or a call option, how the price has changed comes into play with how you would play the game at exercise time. So for instance, here, if the NFT price drops below strike price, then you will exercise the option or not. Now, the implicit thing there is that as a buyer of a call and put option, or as the borrower in the loan game, you are the oracle. You are the price oracle. So you might go and find information about how the price might have changed, but it is really a subjective thing. As the one who is exercising the right to the option or to repay the loan, you are the oracle. It really depends on what you think, whether you are right or wrong, completely irrelevant. Based on whatever information you're going on, you're going to make a decision, and you might have good information or bad information. So it's by no means dynamically linked to the loan or the agreement. Does that address that? Someone else said NFT could be an escrow and not the strike price. I think that it really depends. So for the put option, because you're selling, you don't need the NFT at the end of the exercising of the option. The NFT must go into escrow, most likely, and the strike price moves. Whereas you'll see in the call option, it's the other way around. He gets transferred because you're selling, the buyer is buying. And so they're going to need that. It's okay to transfer it to them. That doesn't have to go into escrow. I don't want to lay the law down on how you do that, but if you think through these two cases, you'll see that it depends on whether it's put or call, whether you will do the strike price. In answer to the comment of the NFT could be an escrow and not the strike price, it depends on whether you're talking call or. Next comment. Yeah, we talked about price fluctuations. Yeah.
And maybe to confirm, there's no auto liquidation on NFTfi. So that's, I think, a very important concept to understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no oracles involved. You're the borrower and the lender are the oracles. There's no auto resolving of the loan. It really comes down to the borrower or the buyer of the option. And they are the oracles. And of course, the seller or the lender is also the oracle because they're negotiating the price of these options or loans. So that's the thing about P2P. It's completely subjective. Valuation is completely subjective. Oracles are implicit in the players of the game, if that makes sense.
I have a question. So we've seen some examples of other protocols doing put options for NFTs, similarly to how you could think about NFTfi loans. And I was wondering if you knew of any protocols already doing call options, or if it's just something pretty new.
Yeah, there is one that comes up a lot. If I remember, did we speak about that once? Have you looked at Putty?
Yeah, we've looked at Putty just because we saw it. Yeah, one of the first projects that comes up if you look for NFT sort of options protocols, but they only have put options as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing with call options is that it is really this issue of when it comes to exercising, the buyer the contract must be able to guarantee that the buyer gets that NFT.
Yeah.
So unless it would be interesting to see how far you can bend that. But I think also the fundamental limitation is that the smart contract is the law. So you don't actually, to do much more efficient options, you actually need law enforcement to make it. So then you're just paying the premium and then you get into trouble if you don't do what you said, but into trouble with who? So you need this kind of like contextual law enforcement, or you need a legal system but when the code is the law, it actually changes,
I think traditional finance, the bank would back the option. And
exactly.
Maybe in this case, if you've got a sort of pool of NFTs, there's some way to spin it that you have an option for a specific collection rather than a specific single NFT.
Absolutely. So if you can bundle the risk, you can make it more efficient, definitely. So some kind of pool, they may be, so in that case, principal doesn't go into escrow, maybe even just a part of it. And you got some kind of pooling that bundles the risk and allows a bigger player to manage that more efficiently, definitely. Yeah, I look forward to see that design, Ben.
Yeah, and I think it's great, like for anyone building on top of NFTfi, that you can make pretty good use of an existing user base and the trusted smart contracts if you don't have to do too many refactors.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's the way out towards more efficiency is pooling. And to do that pooling of risk, of course, there's a few ways to go down that road. Yeah, I think that's the way to crack this. So I just wanted to also just situate you into the reference material of what you can look at and look at the contracts, for instance. So how do you go about doing this? Now, you might go and write the smart contracts. And in fact, those examples I showed you of calls and puts, we sketched ourselves to just try it out. And it's relatively simple to do that. But your ideas might actually be more ambitious, too ambitious to actually implement the smart contracts. So if you can demonstrate convincingly a design and actually not write the smart contracts, but you can really demonstrate a design and demonstrate that it can meaningfully plug into our protocol, then that is also something we will consider as an entry. In that light, I just want to show you whatever designs you come up with, you must at least either you're going to write some smart contracts or you're going to design them, but you still need to prove quite convincingly that they plug into our agreement infrastructure. So on the Notion page, you'll see that there's a NFTfi ETH repo, and there are just folders for each version. We're in version 2. So check that out. And there's some basic documentation about that sets the scene for these contracts. But I wanted to just zoom in a little bit and just show you where the intersection points are that you need to design for. So the main loan that we run on our platform is this direct loan fixed offer. You'll find the Rinkeby and mainnet addresses on here. By the way, stick to Rinkeby for this hackathon. Gurley is not quite ready for action. We deployed to there actually before this hackathon, but it wasn't stable enough for us yet. So you'll see, do check out the direct loan fixed offer, which is the basic agreement that is the plain vanilla loan agreement that we use. You'll find the deployment artifacts for all the contracts in the V2 deployments folder. Just pointing you there if you want to look at some of these contracts on Rinkeby or mainnet. The contract code is in here though, but if you want to interact with the contract on Rinkeby, check that out. I think the simplest way I can describe how you should think about interacting with our contracts is to look at accept offer on that contract, direct loan fixed offer. So accept offer then talks to our agreement coordinator and begins the agreement. And so it's just important to see how accept offer actually begins that agreement. I'll zoom in some more. What I call the agreement coordinator is actually on the chain called the loan coordinator. It generalized later in our minds after we deployed it as loan coordinator, but it's an agreement coordinator in general. And this is really the thing that your design needs to interact with. And the main things to consider is register loan. So think of that as register agreement. And I'm just going to leave it there, but basically it kicks off a new agreement. It issues an ID for it. And the agreement goes on chain with register loan. And then in our case for loans, repayment and liquidation are both ways of resolving a loan. And also on this loan coordinator, the agreement coordinator, we have both of our repay loan, liquidate loan calls this resolve loan function. So your resolve option would be calling resolve loan to plug into the agreement coordinator. And the examples that I showed you earlier are things that we actually wrote and plugged into this, and it works quite nicely. The naming isn't very intuitive because the naming is slanted towards loans, but that's why I keep calling it agreement coordinator, just so that you can reframe it like that, because that is what it can do for you. Won't labor this point, but if you follow the breadcrumbs through the code, you'll see how the loan coordinator is called by our loan contract. The other artifact I wanted to just share with you is our SDK. So if you're designing options protocol purely on the smart contract layer, this is not going to be interesting for you. If you're looking at alternative asset classes, the first bounty, then this might be something you want to use. It's our public SDK that interacts with our loan platform and smart contract layer, and it brings those together. To use this, you need an API key. So if you do want an API key for this hackathon, speak to George, who is in my top left. I don't know where he is for you. There he is, and he will organize you a key. And then, of course, there are these descriptions of the bounties in particular that, as I said, use them as inspiration, but not as law or too hard a spec of what we want. They're more there for inspiration. So that is really what I wanted to share with you all. And I will be around Discord. George will be around there. I'll pop in if there are any questions or comments, pop in every so often. And yeah, that's it. Any comments?
Did you go over the last comment on Eamon?
Oh,
Why are we winning?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I would reframe it as, why is peer-to-peer winning over fractionalization, or NFTX, you would say, over pooling? So things like NFTX, NFT20, they are ultimately dealing with the floor price of things. So if you're going to, in the simplest case, I don't want to trivialize those platforms, and they absolutely have their place. But in the simplest case, you've got let's say a punk, and you put it into a pool of punks and you extract value from that. So if you are going to take a punk and put it in a pool, that means your punk is sitting on the floor price of whatever the characteristics and the trait mix is of that pool. So in a sense, index pools like that, they are dealing with floor price assets. And while there are many floor price assets, there are more floor price assets than not in a collection, depending on the collection though. But let me dare that generalization. They are the lower value assets. So the moment you get into and so if you can think of floor price of any collection, let's say the floor price punks are in a sense fungible. They're not non-fungible. They're in a sense, they're fungible in the context of a pool of other punks. So they are the least interesting punks. And so they're the least valuable punks. And I'm just using punks as an example here, but any kind of collection, the floor price are almost like the fungibles of the non-fungible collection. So in a sense, it has its place. There are floor price assets, and you want to get liquidity for your floor price assets. And then you can use index pools like NFTx and so on. And that's great, but it doesn't help you with anything that isn't on the floor. In terms of fractional, that's a kind of a more, also a nuanced issue, because firstly, there is a thing about collectors themselves don't want fractions of things. In the same way that art collectors don't want fractions of art pieces, they want the piece. So there is a bit of a aesthetic or ethos in that sense coming into play. Having said that, it is going to happen, and it is happening, that people do want to own a piece of the Mona Lisa also, and that is going to happen, but it's a small part of the territory, fractionalization. And I think it's a valuable part of the map, but it is always just going to be a part of it. So I would say, why does lending in a peer-to-peer sense win? I wouldn't say it wins. I just think it's probably the bigger part of the map. Not necessarily only peer-to-peer, but lending, non-fractional lending on truly idiosyncratic pieces and not floor price pieces. Yeah. And I'm just catching up with the rest of your question or comment. Yeah. So I do think that an important part of the response to your comment is the more non-fungible a piece is. So we talk about NFTs as if it's all equally non-fungible, but a floor price asset is more fungible than a golden punk or whatever, and a golden ape. I mix that up. So I think when it comes the short tail of the most non-fungible pieces comes down to subjective appraisals from collectors and sellers, and it comes down to that human element of peer-to-peer deal making. Cool. I'm going to leave that at that. Thanks, Nick. Is that?
What other things can we build using the NFTi API? I think the options are endless.
Yeah. The options are endless, pardon the pun, since we talked about options so much. But yeah, I think to answer that question in general, agreements between two parties. And having said that, the parties don't have to be individuals. We already have integrators who integrate on a pool level with individual borrowers. So there are ways to bulk up on the lending side and actually have a pool that deals with many borrowers. Harder to do the other way around. But in answer to your question, any agreement really between two parties, you can, in the most general sense, frame in this way. So any kind of like subjective deal making between two parties doesn't mean that they're not looking up prices on some other oracle to make those deals. Yeah, that's the most general question. As I said earlier, the options is one thing that we identified as something we're interested in, but any super creative agreements you come up with, we would certainly consider for this hackathon.